Bitcoin Pizza Day is an annual celebration commemorating the first ever real-world Bitcoin transaction, which took place 14 years ago today on May 22nd, 2010. On that day, a Florida programmer named Laszlo Hanya purchased 2 Papa John's pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoin, which at the time was worth around $30. Today, the value of 10,000 Bitcoin would be worth more than $700 million. This podcast is for information and entertainment purposes only. Nothing on this podcast should be construed as financial advice. All views expressed on this podcast are solely the opinions of the host and/or any guests that we might have from time to time. Nothing on this podcast should be construed as a specific inducement to make a particular investment or to follow a particular investing strategy. Hello, you sexy sat stackers, and welcome to the latest episode of the Bitcoin Bulletin Podcast. As always, I am Chris, and as usual, I'm coming to you from a studio in an undisclosed location on Florida's glorious Space Coast. As I alluded to in the introduction, today is the 14th anniversary of Bitcoin Pizza Day, so I hope you're out there enjoying a slice with friends, family, or fellow plebs. I have a slight confession to make. I did not enjoy my traditional pizza today. I bought all the ingredients to make a pizza at home, and then I was reminded that we had just done that like 3 days ago and that everybody was pizzaed out. So I caved and made Hatch green chili cheeseburgers instead. But most of you, at least those of you who celebrate Bitcoin Pizza Day, are probably doing so with a Papa John's pizza if you have Papa John's where you live. Because as we mentioned, 14 years ago today, computer programmer from Jacksonville, Florida named Laszlo Hanya made the first ever real-world Bitcoin transaction when he purchased those 2 large pepperoni pizzas, 2 large Papa John's pizzas, for an astounding sum of 10,000 Bitcoin. Obviously, had he hodled that Bitcoin, it would be worth more than $700 million at the time of this recording. In fact, in an interview a few years ago with, I think it was Anderson Cooper, Laszlo mentioned that in total, he had spent more than 100,000 Bitcoin jumpstarting the nascent Bitcoin infrastructure, the nascent Bitcoin economy. And of course, if he had hodled that Bitcoin, people like to point out he would be one of the largest whales in all of Bitcoin. But at the same time, had he not made those transactions, Bitcoin might not be where it is today. So without people using Bitcoin for what it is intended to be used for, who knows what those 10,000 Bitcoin to be worth. At the time, that was roughly 200 blocks worth of mining reward. But Laszlo, he scored a lot of early mining rewards, and he is credited with inventing GPU mining. So I don't know how much Bitcoin he still holds, but I have a feeling old Laszlo is doing pretty well. But either way, on this anniversary of Bitcoin Pizza Day, we salute you and all you did for the ecosystem. So thank you, Laszlo. All right, on to what we are here to talk about. But before we do, let's take a look at the vital statistics. As I mentioned, today is Wednesday. I probably didn't mention. Today is Wednesday, May 22nd, 2024. I guess that goes without saying since I did mention it's Bitcoin Pizza Day. And of course, besides Bitcoin Pizza Day, it is also DCA Wednesday. So we'll be making our 148th weekly DCA stack of Satoshis a little while later in the show. Before we get into all that and more, though, again, those vital statistics. At the time of this recording, we're sitting at a block height of 844,663. And Bitcoin is ringing in more than $3,000 more expensive in US dollar terms than last DCA Wednesday at its current price of $69,510, which means that for every filthy fiat dollar that we convert into Bitcoin, we will be receiving 1,439 sats. Still not too shabby, but I do miss those days of 2,000 to 3,000 sats per dollar. I don't know what the most sats per dollar we got is. Just scrolling through my notes here. I think at one point in time we purchased for as cheap as $16,400, and at the time that was 6,062 sats per dollar. So as they say, you get Bitcoin at the price you deserve, and currently we're going to stack at a price which will get us only 1,439 sats per dollar. But, in the not too distant future, maybe this summer, maybe sooner, depending what happens tomorrow, and we'll get into that a little bit more later, that number may be greatly diminished. In fact, it will eventually be greatly diminished. So that is why we are DCAing and stacking as furiously as we can while we have the opportunity. And of course, I still say, we're still early. $69,500 Bitcoin seems really, really expensive. And 4 years ago, that would have been an all-time high. But, compared to $100,000, we have a long way to go. Compared to $1 million Bitcoin, we have a long way to go. And if you believe in the everything divided by 21 million theory, Bitcoin will eventually be in the hundreds of millions of dollars per Bitcoin. But either way, you are early. All right, I'm always getting carried away when I try and get through these statistics. The current block height, I know we just did this and it's almost 4 years away, but the current block height puts us 205,337 blocks away from the next miner reward halving. The only reason I even bring that up is to remind you that despite all the hype, especially when it comes to the upcoming halving cycle bull run, if history rhymes or repeats, we've got a face melting bull run on the horizon sometime maybe this fall around Thanksgiving or Christmas time, if not sooner. But traditionally about 6 months to a year after the halving, which we just had. But TikTok next block, Bitcoin marches on. It doesn't care. The miner reward halving is going to continue to be reduced in half by half every 210,000 blocks. And it will do so again for the next time, approximately March 22nd, 2028, when, if history repeats, we'll have just started climbing out of the latest bear market or a crab market. And we'll be looking forward to yet another face melting bull run until eventually every last Satoshi is issued. Bitcoin's current US dollar value gives it a market capitalization of $1.37 trillion. That is $70 billion more than last week, which puts us about a little more than $50 billion above silver's market cap. So we've retaken the mantle from silver. Of course, we're still about 14 times below gold's market cap. So again, when I was saying you're early, even if Bitcoin only lives up to its role as electronic gold and just becomes on par with gold, we still have almost 14x to go, price-wise, to get there. For those of you who continue to value wealth in shiny yellow rocks, speaking of gold, it will currently cost you 29 ounces of gold to purchase just one Bitcoin. That is another full ounce more than last week and almost 2.5 ounces more than the week before that. And that is even with gold nearing all-time record highs, or basically at all-time record highs for an ounce of gold in US dollar terms. So while the gold bugs out there are celebrating and they think they're just making a killing, having surged from around 1,800 an ounce to 2,800 or 2,500-ish an ounce, if you're measuring your value in Bitcoin terms, gold is continuing to trend to zero. And mark my words, as I've said repeatedly, show after show after show, I believe by the end of this year, we will be referring to this metric in terms of pounds of gold, not ounces of gold. We're almost already back to the 2 pounds of gold. But I've said this before, when you're talking about like the age of a child, a 2-year-old child is often referred to as 24 months, a 3-year-old, they maybe start saying years by then. But for the beginning of a child's life, even though they might be more than a year old or more than 2 years old, they often refer to it in terms of months because their lifespan is so short. So even though 32 ounces of gold would be technically 2 pounds, people will still probably refer to it as 32 ounces of gold. But when we start talking about 3 or more pounds of gold, 4, 5 pounds of gold per one Bitcoin, then obviously we'll be measuring it in terms of pounds. And I say that's coming. I firmly believe that will happen by the end of 2024. And for those of you who are celebrating Bitcoin Pizza Day, for those of you who value your wealth in pizza, one Bitcoin will currently purchase you 3,887 large pepperoni pizzas from Papa John's. Not quite the 10,000 pizzas that would be the official pizza flippening. I saw a great little hodler cartoon celebrating today's Bitcoin Pizza Day, and it showed the little hodler going up to a pepperoni pizza, or going to a pizzeria and ordering a pizza, and it says that'll be 10,000 Bitcoin, and then it shows him in 2024, and he says I have one Bitcoin that'll be 10,000 pizzas or whatever. The point being, we got a ways to go before we have the official pizza flippening, but not much more than just double the current price of Bitcoin. So the pizza flipping is coming, but more importantly, perhaps, that 3,887 large pizzas is one pizza a day for more than 10 and a half years, which of course is more than 2 complete halving cycles from now. So as I've mentioned before, that means you could probably never eat that last pizza if you try and spend a whole Bitcoin on pizza, because you wouldn't even spend half of a Bitcoin at current prices. You wouldn't even spend half of a Bitcoin before the next halving cycle bull run begins. And so we've got whatever all-time high Bitcoin's going to set this halving, which will put that number of pizzas through the roof. It'll be face melting and cheese melting. And then, of course, we'll have had a second bull run. Bitcoin could easily be worth $1 million or more by 2030. And, and we're talking 2034 by the time you would have been able to purchase 3,887 pizzas, purchasing just one pizza a day. The point being, as you try and spend your Bitcoin on pizza, Bitcoin will continue its march up and to the right, continue to increase in value in pizza purchasing terms and US dollar terms. And as you try and chip away at your stash one pizza at a time, your Bitcoin's going to increase in value faster than you can eat pizza. For example, in just 1 week, our Bitcoin pizza purchasing power went up by almost 200 pizzas. And obviously 200 pizzas is more than one pizza a day for 7 days. So I think you get my point. It kind of reminds me, if you're old enough or have seen a copy of it, I think the movie is called Brewster's Millions, and it was a Richard Pryor movie. And the idea was he was going to inherit millions and millions of dollars, but there was one stipulation. He had a fixed amount of money and he had to blow it all. It had to be gone. He had a certain amount of time to do it. And he couldn't buy anything that would retain value. For example, he couldn't buy collectibles. He couldn't buy gold. He couldn't buy Bitcoin because he has to piss the money away, basically. And it turns out it's incredibly tough to do so. And that was with the depreciating asset. Of course, that was a movie. It was a comedy. It's a great movie if you haven't ever seen it. It's obviously really dated because it's from the early to mid 1980s, but it's a fun movie, especially if you like old Richard Pryor movies. And speaking of tangents, time to get back on track yet again. Bitcoin activity it's absolutely soaring. Clark Moody, as we mentioned last week, no longer includes the number of blocks pending in his mempool. Doesn't include that metric anymore on his dashboard. But he is showing 174,216 transactions pending in his mempool. Mempool.space has got a slightly larger mempool, or at least they're excluding fewer transactions. And they're showing 205,735 transactions in their mempool. I was listening to a podcast a few days ago, and I honestly don't remember whether it was Citadel Dispatch or what it was, but it seems to me it was Matt Odell talking about it. I honestly don't remember, so I don't want to put words in anybody's mouths, but he or somebody was mentioning that their mempool is nowhere near as full as mempool.space's, that maybe Clark Moody's 174,216 transactions is probably closer to the average mempool because they couldn't figure out how mempool.space was getting to that number of 205,735, which was higher than a lot of other mempools. But the point being, that's a lot of Bitcoin transactions. But despite that, Clark Moody's fee estimator is saying that if you have a high priority transaction that you're doing on chain, that you need to guarantee is mined in the very next block or two, that a fee of just 15 sats per VByte will guarantee that you're in a priority 1 or 2, the next block or 2. And that's about the same as last week when it was recommending 14 sats per VByte to be in the next block. If you have up to a day to wait, they're recommending a fee of 10 sats per VByte. And if you have up to a week, they're saying the lowest possible fee that you could set would be 7 sats per VByte. Mempool.space is telling a similar story. They're saying that their high priority fee recommendation is 13 sats per VByte. At Bitcoin's current price above $69,000, that works out to about $1.26 to send a Bitcoin transaction in the very next block, more than 50% off of what you can send a MoneyGram at Western Union through Walmart just to the United States of Puerto Rico for. So incredibly, incredibly cheap still. And I want to also point out that just the other night, I was noticing that 7 sats per VByte was being included in pretty much every block. And in fact, there was one particular block where nobody had paid, not a single not a single transaction included a fee of greater than 70 sats per VByte. And there's almost always one or two transactions where they just really, really, really overpay because they don't care, and they want to get that. They want to just be guaranteed that transaction is mined immediately. And so they just, instead of using replace by fee, they just overshoot the transaction. And even so, the highest fee was a rate of 70 sats per VByte. So that's pretty cool. Mempool.space is similarly saying that if you have up to a day to wait or so, that a fee of 11 or 12 sats per VByte for a medium or low priority transaction will eventually get mined, and that a no priority transaction should include a minimum fee of 8 sats per VByte, so just 1 sat per VByte more than Clark Moody's estimator, which was recommending 7. And again, just last night or the other day, I remember seeing 6 and 7 sats per VByte were getting mined routinely into the very next block. So obviously this is perishable information, that the fee recommendations fluctuate. And unless you're listening to this show in real time, by the time you hear it, that might be different. So if you do have a transaction that you want to make on chain, go to Clark Moody's dashboard or mempool.space or both and just kind of get an idea of what fees are looking like, and make sure that you're familiar with and using a wallet that will let you use replace by fee, so that you can bump that fee if you do lowball it and it doesn't get mined right away. Speaking of on-chain, that metric that you know has been my favorite for most of the history of this podcast, Bitcoin's 24-hour average transaction rate, of course, is booming. It's about as high as we've seen it in quite a while, averaging 6.85 transactions per second, up from 5.94 transactions per second last DCA Wednesday, and 5.04 transactions per second the DCA Wednesday before that. And while this is just a pure speculation, just a pure observation based on reading this metric every Wednesday for the last almost 3 years now, once again, with the transaction rate going up, the price of Bitcoin has been pumping as well. So they say, correlation is not causation, but certainly I've noticed a correlation between 24-hour transaction rate and the price of Bitcoin going up. You would assume that would swing both ways, that the price was plummeting, that people would be rushing their Bitcoin to exchanges to dump it if they were panic selling. But it hasn't really worked out that way, probably because most Bitcoin is being held by hodlers who know the game. And most of us, at least at this stage in the cycle, aren't panic selling. We don't have those lettuce hands. And speaking of on-chain and speaking of mining, we're just 41 blocks away from the next mining difficulty adjustment. The difficulty it takes for a miner to find a block is adjusted every 2016 blocks, which is in theory about every 2 weeks, with the goal of having blocks come in on an average of a block every 10 minutes. And so that's going to be sometime tomorrow, 41 blocks away. That's maybe less than, 60 blocks would be 10 hours. So sometime overnight, unless blocks really slow down. And depending where you get, well, I guess it doesn't matter where you get your data, because I'm looking at 2 different sources, and they're both saying that it's going to be a 1.1% increase. It might be the first time those 2 sources have agreed to the decimal place. But that's because we're only 41 blocks away, so it's pretty much set in stone. Obviously, anything could happen. The last 41 blocks could all come in lickety-split, or they could have a couple of blocks that drag out for 2 or 3 hours. As again, it is just random chance, so we won't really know till we know. But it's looking like it's going to be a very small difficulty increase. And that is because blocks are currently averaging 9 minutes and 54 seconds. That's about 3 seconds faster than last DCA Wednesday when they were averaging 9 minutes and 57 seconds. Still really, really close to that 10-minute goal, which is why it's such a small difficulty adjustment. And again, if you're an average pleb and you're sending transactions on chain, the difference between 9 minutes, 54 seconds and 10 minutes is pretty negligible. So that statistic is really only important if you're a miner. Maybe you're trying to heat your swimming pool or your hot tub with an old S9, or you live somewhere where it's cold, which I guess would be south of the equator now, since we're heading into summer on the northern hemisphere, and you need to heat your house and you're using an old ASIC to do so, or you're a full-scale commercial miner, in which case if you're talking hundreds and hundreds of terahashes or exahashes, 1% is a big number. But for the average pleb, even if you're a home miner, we're not looking at much of a difference in difficulty adjustment coming up in just a few hours. Real quick, before I continue, I want to take a minute to thank those of you listening on your favorite Podcasting 2.0 apps, such as Fountain. Podcasting 2.0 allows you to help support your favorite transactions through the value for value model by streaming sats on a per minute basis as you listen, or by boosting the podcast, which is a one-time support where it's basically like a shout out. You send a message to your favorite podcast or a comment on that podcast on that episode, and because it's a lightning transaction, you support the podcast with some sats when you send that message. And speaking of our listeners, our geographic distribution of listeners has had it's not a huge shakeup, but it feels like a huge shakeup considering it had been so ossified. And maybe some of you are out there answering the call that I put out in the last episode where I was saying, there were a couple countries lurking below the top 10, that it really wouldn't take that many people to maybe bump you into the top 10. I listed Mexico as a result, which was lurking down at 11. So we have a slight change, and I can see the numbers pumped. So if there's a few of you out there that have been spreading the word, helping pump this podcast, helping feed that algorithm monster, thank you so much for doing so. And it's having results. I can see it in the statistics. But as far as our top 10 countries for listenership are concerned, of course, the top three didn't change. Number one remains the United States, and it actually increased its dominance a tiny bit. About 2% more of you were listening from the United States than previously. So thank you to my fellow Americans listening from in the United States. It would be cool if it broke that down further by state or region. It doesn't. So I have no idea if all of you are listening from right here in Florida or where you're at in the United States. But hello and thank you to all my fellow Americans who are out there listening. Number two remains Argentina, which is probably where a percent or two that came from, because we have a slight decrease in listenership from Argentina, but not enough to move it from the number 2 spot. So hola, muchas gracias, amigos, in Argentina. Number 3 remains Germany, which pretty much exactly the same number of listeners. So I guess it's Guten Nacht, mein Freunde in Deutschland. Dankeschön, danke für alles. Here's the first change up this week, though. Luxembourg had been number 4, and they slipped one spot, with Canada flipping the number 4 spot. And so Canada is now the number 4 country for listenership. So thank you to those of you living on the northern border of the United States, that what I used to say the Great White North, but obviously where the weather's probably pretty darn gorgeous right about now. I listen to at least one Canadian Bitcoin podcast, and they're always talking about playing sports, getting some golf and some football, etc., played as in lieu of ice hockey. So it's nice that the weather is improving up there, unless you're just a winter bug and you really like ice cubes and snowflakes. But either way, thank you to all our friends listening from Canada, who is now the number 4 country by listenership. So that's really cool. Of course, Luxembourg is hanging in there at number 5. So again, Dankeschön, mein Freunde in Luxembourg, Morgen to everybody who speaks Luxembourgish. Still a really respectable showing for Luxembourg. Number 6, that has not changed. That remains Spain. So hola, muchas gracias, amigos in Spain. Number 7 is a shakeup. The United Kingdom has moved up 2 spots. Previously, they had been the number 9 country, and this week they're number 7. So hello to my friends across the pond in the United Kingdom. Thank you for listening. And along those lines, we had Venezuela move up 2 spots from number 10 to number 8. So now Venezuela occupies the 8th spot in our geographic distribution listenership. So hola, muchas gracias, amigos in Venezuela. Really, really cool to see so many people in countries where I personally think Bitcoin is more important than in countries like the United States or Europe, where for the time being, we have a relatively stable currency. Certainly countries like Argentina and Colombia have had more currency tumult, the United States and Venezuela have had more currency tumult. I'm having a hard time spitting this out. You get my point. Argentina and Venezuela have had more inflation, worse inflation, less reliable currency in years past than the United States. So it's cool that so many of you are listening from a country where Bitcoin it can be more helpful than it can to the average pleb in the United States, at least for the time being. Of course, when the dollar goes, the hurt's going to be spread around pretty darn equally. And eventually, it doesn't matter where you are at, you'll want to be on this lifeboat. And fortunately, you probably are if you're listening to this podcast. So once again, thank you. Muchas gracias to all our friends in Venezuela for coming in at number 8 and for showing your support each and every week by tuning in. Number 9 is now Colombia, which has dropped 2 spots. But the listenership numbers from Colombia are about the same as they were. So despite the fact that Colombia has dropped 2 notches in the top 10 to number 9. That is because we picked up listeners in other countries that bumped them above Colombia, not that we had a drop off in listeners from Colombia. So, hola, muchas gracias, amigos in Colombia. Thank you for coming in. Thank you for listening and showing your support on such a volume that you're in the top 10 as country number 9. And one more big change, Mexico, you did it. After lurking at number 11 for probably more than 6 months, Mexico is now in the top 10, coming in at number 10. So, hola, muchas gracias, amigos in Mexico. Noticeably missing from this list is Sweden, which had previously been in number 8 and is now several spaces out of the top 10. We normally only list the top 10, but I had mentioned that Mexico had been hanging in there at number 11. Mates down in Australia, you are so close to breaking into the top 10. Australia has surged as well. Not enough to break into the top 10, but you are lurking just below Mexico at number 11. So if you're listening from Australia, thank you for listening in. Thank you. And if you've helped Orange Pill some of your friends and helped turn those friends or relatives onto this podcast, and if you're the reason why Australia is surging in listenership, thank you twicefold for helping feed that algorithm monster and promote this podcast. All right. Regardless of where you are, I do appreciate each and every one of you. And this list goes on and on and on. We have listeners pick any country, name any country you can think of, and you're on the list somewhere. And that is really super flattering because obviously Bitcoin is for everyone. Bitcoin is going to be the global reserve currency one day, and it's going to be just important to everyone, regardless of where you find yourself. For right now, it's more important potentially in some countries than in others, but Bitcoin is global, and so is our audience, and that is really, really, really flattering. I mean, I like talking to Bitcoin. Just listening to this podcast, you can probably tell that I like to talk in general. I've never been accused of being super quiet or hiding my opinions, but it's very rewarding to see that people are listening, and the fact that you're listening from all over the world, that's just a miracle. I mean, 10, 20 years ago, prior to the invention of the mainstream adoption of the internet, when I was much younger in the 80s and 90s, I couldn't have just sat down in my studio and hit record and started talking to people all over the world, at least not this easily. International phone calls were really expensive. We used to do like just one call a year, maybe 2 calls a year to my friends in Germany. Like we'd call them on Christmas and we'd call them on their birthday. And that was the only time we actually got to talk to them in person. Other than that, it was to send a letter, not even an email back in the day, and that could take a week or two to get there. So the world has really changed, and that's really cool. But again, I'm getting off track. Thank you to all of you, regardless where you're listening from, and to those of you that have helped support the podcast by turning on friends and family members, helping expose more people to this podcast. That is really cool. I cannot tell you how thankful I am for each and every one of you and for your support, just by listening. And if not, not just listening, but bringing a friend along, sharing this podcast with others is even cooler. All right, back to the news. Obviously, we led off the podcast with the news about it being the 14th anniversary of Bitcoin Pizza Day. And for those, let's do a little bit more of a deep dive that might not be familiar with it. It all started on, I think it was about March 17th. I think that the post is actually timestamped the 18th, but I think that's in UTC. And the post is from Florida, so that made it the 17th of May, 2010. That programmer from Jacksonville, Florida, Laszlo Hanya, posted that he wanted to purchase pizza for Bitcoin. Writing a post that says, I'll pay 10,000 Bitcoins for a couple of pizzas. Like maybe 2 large ones, so I have some left over for the next day. I like having leftover pizza to nibble on later. You can make the pizza yourself and bring it to my house. Ballsy Laszlo, especially now, right? I guess at the time Bitcoin was obscure and not very worth very much, so you wouldn't feel threatened by having a total stranger come to your house for Bitcoin. But I digress. You can bring it to my house or order it for me from a delivery place. But what I'm aiming for is getting food delivered in exchange for Bitcoin, where I don't have to order or prepare it myself. Kind of like ordering a breakfast platter at a hotel or something. They just bring you something to eat and you're happy. I like things like onions, peppers, sausage, mushrooms, tomatoes, pepperoni, etc. Just standard stuff. No weird fish toppings or anything like that. I also like regular cheese pizzas, which may be cheaper to prepare or otherwise acquire. If you're interested, please let me know and we can work out a deal. Thanks, Laszlo. That is what started it all. Obviously, somebody took him up on it, ordered him two large pizzas from Papa John's. I just say pepperoni because that's our metric we read out every day. Every Wednesday, it was not pepperoni, and they could have cheapskated because they left the door wide open. He said, "I'll even take a regular cheese pizza," and he got better than that. So because Bitcoiners are generous, they hooked him up with two really nice pizzas, and the rest, as they say, is history. So once again, thank you, Laszlo, for doing your part to help Bitcoin fulfill the role, its primary role, what Bitcoin is all about. It's establishing its use case as a currency. Without you and doing what you did, we wouldn't be here. I certainly wouldn't be here. So that's really cool. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. And thank you on behalf of everyone listening to this podcast, because if they didn't know, now they do. And I'm sure you all feel the same way. Bitstein tweeted out a few hours ago, on Bitcoin Pizza Day 2024, 10,000 Bitcoin can buy approximately 40% of Papa John's International. So 14 years ago, 10,000 Bitcoin bought two pizzas. 10,000 Bitcoin bought two pizzas 14 years ago. And today you could literally buy almost half of the company. And that is just nuts. We've come a long way. And we're still early, plebs, because imagine what those 10,000 Bitcoin will buy when Bitcoin's worth $1 million or 2 million or whatever we ultimately end up at. The sky's the limit, to the moon, as they say. So Coinbase had what I like to consider an epic fail today, but something that's just absolutely par for the course for Coinbase. Coinbase and Brian Armstrong will do everything they can to avoid actually saying the word Bitcoin. And they did today. They tweeted out on their Coinbase account, "This Bitcoin Pizza Day, we're celebrating how far crypto has come since 2010 in helping create a cheaper, faster system." And of course, that's where the reference to Bitcoin ends, because they immediately in the same sentence flipped to crypto. And then they announced, "Welcome to the Coinbase Pizza Truck. $1 USDC slices. Payment is easy as pie." And they have their picture of their Coinbase Pizza Truck, where they're selling you pizza for USDC, for a freaking stablecoin, to celebrate Bitcoin Pizza Day. Classic naked mole rat Brian Armstrong, doing anything he can to try and steal Bitcoin's thunder and promote their S-coin. So go yourself, Coinbase. Okay, what is being touted as the biggest news of the day is breaking this afternoon. Word that the U.S. House of Representatives has passed the so-called FIT 21 bill. And of course, CoinDesk, who's also not really a friend to Bitcoin, is calling it the biggest ever U.S. policy win for crypto. We'll get into that in a little bit, but their headline, they go way off of left field with this. The first thing they do is, from listening to me in previous podcasts, that I almost throw up in my mouth every time I hear an influencer say, "It's not the party of left or the party of right, it's the party of orange." And that's only in response to someone on the left doing something anti-Bitcoin or someone on the right being pro-Bitcoin. They try and belittle that. So of course, this bill, they immediately flip to the importance of it for crypto, which is actually true because it is more of an S-coin benefit than Bitcoin. And we'll get into that. But they also immediately make it all about the handful of Democrats that supported this bill. The crypto industry recorded its biggest ever U.S. policy win on Wednesday when the House of Representatives approved a wide-reaching bill to establish regulations for digital assets, recording a 279 to 136 vote that saw Democrats cross party lines to support it. So here's how bipartisan this was. They did get 71 Democrats to vote for the bill, but they also had 133 Democrats vote against it, as opposed to 208 Republicans voting for the bill and only 3 Republicans not voting for it. And additionally, you had the President of the United States come out and directly oppose the bill. And you had the Chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, who was a Biden appointee. He's a Biden cabinet member, a Biden appointee. He's part of the executive branch of government, oppose the bill. And you had the chairman of the highest ranking Democrat on the House Financial Services Committee come out and trash it, make darn well known that any Democrats that basically are voting for this Well, she didn't even talk about the Democrats who voted it. She just said this is a horrible bill, and the Republicans are basically hosing the little person for doing so. In fact, the article continuing to delve into their politics, you have to scroll through like 3/4 of the article before you'll see them say anything bad about Democrats in this bill. But they say, and I'm not attacking you personally if you're a registered Democrat and that's what you believe. If you have political views, I don't care what they are as long as you have legitimate reasons for your views. If you're a principled person and you believe whatever you believe, well, that's what I respect. I don't give you credit for being a Democrat or a Republican just because you're towing the party line and you're just going along to get along. People that have conviction in their core beliefs, that is what impresses me in a person. So I'm not going out of my way to trash people for being Democrats, but I'm just mentioning this because this is another case where in the United States, the Democrat Party, which is a political organization that happens to be in control of 2/3 of our government, is openly hostile to Bitcoin. And the two of the most powerful Democrats in Congress are openly hostile. Two of the most influential that can do anything about it being Maxine Waters, who's the ranking Democrat on the House Financial Services Committee, and of course, Pocahontas Elizabeth Warren, who has her famous anti-crypto army. But the article quotes Maxine Waters as saying, characterizing this bill as seeking to let crypto businesses who have been dodging securities laws avoid responsibility. They've already made billions of dollars unlawfully issuing and facilitating the buying and selling of crypto securities, Waters said, and Republicans are now proposing to reward these illegal activities by making these activities legal. I think I've made my opinion on the matter abundantly clear, both in terms of the community cucking itself to politicians in the first place, seeking quote-unquote legal clarity to a discovery which was developed for basically the majority sole purpose, the underlying intention anyway, of circumventing the system. Also, I'm torn like many Bitcoiners are, and it's like, well, yes, a lot of these things are blatantly securities and they are violating the Securities and Exchange Act. They're blatantly securities, and they have been getting away with breaking those laws. But the libertarian in me thinks that those laws are bupkis anyways, and that there are ways other than laws that you can make things safer. If you're trying to protect the little guy, one of the best examples I have for this is like the FAA, the Federal Aviation Regulation Administration, has their federal aviation regulations, or their rules that govern the operating and maintenance and anything there is to do with flying something through the sky in the United States. Other countries have similar organizations. There is not a single FAA regulation that does more to promote safety than your insurance company does. Because if you have an airplane, or you're a pilot, or you rent airplanes that somebody else owns, or you fly as a passenger in somebody's plane, I guarantee their insurance company is putting stricter regulations, doing more to guarantee your safety than the FAA is, because the FAA is a big bloated illegal bureaucracy. Big bloated legal bureaucracy. That was an interesting Freudian slip. Illegal bureaucracy. They move slowly. They don't always have the best intentions, and they have just absolute idiots and reprobates making decisions, oftentimes in areas that aren't even their expertise. Getting onto the airplane tangent. In the 1980s, when the FAA was coming up with their regulations to regulate hot air balloons, at the time I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is like the international ballooning capital. They have a huge balloon fiesta there. The international gas balloon races are held there. Ballooning is really big and really important in Albuquerque. And one of the very first ever licensed commercial balloon pilots and balloon instructors, I guess you don't have an instructor rating in a hot air balloon. Anybody that's a commercial pilot is by de facto an instructor, can instruct, or at least they could. Had the privilege of taking the gentleman who was responsible for spearheading the regulations regarding and regulating ballooning and balloon safety on his very first balloon ride. He'd never seen a balloon in person, had never been in one, had never flown one, and he was responsible for writing the laws that were supposed to keep you safe. On the flip side, the very, very expensive insurance policy that this person had really stringent regulations on what kind of maintenance his balloon was allowed to have, how old it was allowed to be before he had to replace it, where he was allowed to fly it, what conditions he was allowed to fly it under, who he was allowed to bring with him, etc. So for the marauds people out there that think that we can't have anything nice, that the country would just, the world would just devolve into complete anarchy unless the government regulates everything. The government does a very bad job at everything it does. And regulating crypto is not something we should be holding up as a landmark, a championship bill. So in this case, while I say the Republicans oftentimes are more pro-Bitcoin, more pro-crypto, I can see a lot of the points, because one of the things this bill does do is basically grandfathers in some S coins that are blatant scams. And just by the virtue of this law declaring them not securities would be the only reason they wouldn't be securities violations. And the law gives the power to the Commodities Future Trading Commission. The Commodities Commission, it basically classifies cryptos as commodities and takes the SEC's authority to regulate any of them away, with the minor exception of a few exceptions. And all of this is kind of moot anyway, because the Democrat-controlled Senate does not have any companion bills. So for a bill to become law in the United States, the House has to pass it, the Senate has to pass it, and the president has to sign it. The president hasn't actually threatened to veto this like he did the last piece of crypto legislation that was passed, the SAB 20 or whatever, the bill allowing banks to custody Bitcoin. But he has promised to veto if it passes the Senate. He has not made that big of a threat against this bill, but let's face it, no companion bill has been introduced. The chances of Elizabeth Warren introducing one in her committee are 0. So it's probably dead on arrival anyway. However, as if to put the cherry on top of the whole, leftists cannot seriously embrace Bitcoin because their entire basis of their policy is the involuntarily distribution of wealth, something Bitcoin is resistant to say the least. A Bitcoin Magazine tweet highlighted, and you know how I feel about Bitcoin Magazine. They, with their ordinal subscription shenanigans, the Taproot Wizard BS at the last convention, they have a tweet highlighting yet another example of the current administration planting their feet firmly on the anti-Bitcoin side of the line, making Bitcoin not only a campaign issue for the upcoming presidential election, but fundraising off of it. Bitcoin Magazine promoting one of Joe Biden's tweets saying, "New Joe Biden's campaign asks for donations," saying, quote, "cryptocurrency executives are backing Donald Trump, outraising them." Earlier today, Trump started accepting Bitcoin and crypto as campaign donations, and Biden saying, "Folks, this couldn't be any more serious. Cryptocurrency executives and oil barons are coming out of the woodwork for Trump. They are rushing $800,000 checks at glitzy events. Now Trump is outraising us. He raked in $76 million total in April, over $50 million coming from a single gala in Palm Beach." So he's doubling down on his anti-Bitcoin stance, and he's making he's trying to frame Bitcoiners as MAGA Trump fanatics. And he's drawn a line in the sand here, and he's standing clearly on the anti-Bitcoin side of it. So you think he would have learned his lesson. His own tweet saying that crypto execs are rushing $800,000 checks to the Trump campaign should be a clue that Bitcoiners are taking notice that you're coming after Bitcoin and crypto, that when you're attacking Bitcoin, when you're attacking cryptocurrency, obviously many, many people are single issue voters. And if Bitcoin or whatever your favorite crypto is your single issue that you're going to vote on, somebody that might vote for Biden under any other circumstances, you're going to lose that vote over Bitcoin. And that shows you just how big of a threat Bitcoin is to their way of life. As I mentioned, if you're a leftist and you think that the rich should be taxed, have all their money taken from them, given to the poor, Robin Hood style or whatever, if you're welcome to have those beliefs. I'm not calling you a bad person. I'm not saying that you're wrong. What I'm saying is that you can't do that in a Bitcoin society, in a Bitcoin world, because you can't take my Bitcoin and spend it on whatever program you want to if I'm not willing to give it to you. The only way you can do so is to try and take as much of it as you can by a force, having your federal agents round people up, hold them at gunpoint and try and force them to hand it over. But you'd literally have to go house to house to do that. And you're not going to stay in office very long. I mean, maybe if it gets to that point, who knows if we even have elections anymore, because I have a real hard time believing that you're going to be able to retain power by physically grabbing people by the shirt collars, pointing a gun at them and holding them in prisoner until they sign over their Bitcoin, which is what they would have to do to try and continue spending money like the drunken sailors that they currently are. All right, as usual, the price of Bitcoin is in the news, and while this is not an S-Coin podcast, in this case, it is related to the news around the proposed Ethereum ETFs. Up until about a day ago, it was widely believed, by myself included, that the Ethereum ETFs were dead on arrival. SEC Chairman Gary Gensler has made his position well known, that he considers Ethereum a security. He considers Bitcoin a commodity, that because they're completely different, if they're illegal securities, he would not be likely to approve an ETF based on selling an illegal security. Anyway, the SEC was behaving exactly the same way they did in the lead up to them rejecting the spot Bitcoin ETFs the first time around before that decision was tossed by a lawsuit, basically just being radio silent. They took the application, they didn't do anything, ran their time frame out until they couldn't get any more extensions, and then just denied it on the last possible day. And that's what it seemed like they were doing with the Ethereum ETFs. All of that changed abruptly, though, when yesterday or the day before the SEC started asking for expedited amendments to the forms that the exchanges were required to file to list these ETFs. And that's what they did when it was obvious that they were going to approve the Bitcoin ETFs. So this has led to a lot of speculation that maybe something's changed, whether SEC Chairman Gensler has been ordered to change his mind by the president, or whether the big banks and BlackRock, et cetera, put pressure on him, or it could all just be, it could just be wrong. Also, speculation could be flat out wrong. But basically, the odds of approval in the eyes of the odds makers previously had been stated at 25% chance of approval, and now it's been raised to a 75% chance of approval. And as a result, the price of Ethereum went through the roof. It went up more than 20% yesterday. Again, this is not an ETH podcast, and I think ETH is an S-coin that you should stay away from. And I also want to point out that even with that huge pump, they still didn't come anywhere near their 2017 all-time high. So, the price went up, but they're still under 4,000 a coin, and I think what were they, 4,700 or something at their all-time high. So even this big pump, if you bought in the run-up of 2017, you're still underwater on your ETH. But that's neither here nor there. The point being that has also pumped the price of Bitcoin. The price of Bitcoin surged as high as almost 72,000. I think got up to 71,980 before cooling off a bit to where we are now in the $69,000 range. So I guess we're going to find out in the next day or so. I'm looking at some of the headlines here. Fox Business ran the headline, SEC signals possible approval of anticipated Ethereum spot ETFs. Of course, CoinDesk has an article about it. Why wouldn't they? Somewhere in here, there was saying that that basically the ETFs have until one of the ETFs, the deadline for the SEC to make it a decision on it, I think is tomorrow. I remember that's the Van Eck. So I think May 23rd is the deadline for the Van Eck Ethereum ETF application. So they're either going to approve or deny the Van Eck application as soon as tomorrow. And just like with the Bitcoin ETFs, there were a bunch of ETFs that were all queued up in a line, ready to go one after another. So they just did them all at once. And just because the deadline is tomorrow, they could have an agreement with Van Eck where they say, hey, we're going to approve ETF, but we're going to do it all at once. So you have to wait a little bit or whatever. Who knows whether it happens tomorrow, whether they're denied tomorrow or approved tomorrow. But the possibility is it's looking increasingly likely that there's going to be a spot Ethereum ETF approved in the very near future. And as Adam Meister at TechBalt on Twitter has said repeatedly, both in his podcast and in the past when he was doing a regular podcast, he used to do a daily podcast called The One Bitcoin Show. Now he mainly sends out tweets, but he championed this news and basically said he told you all along that it's not a zero-sum game, that if this new positive news pumps ETH, it's going to pump Bitcoin. What's good for the ecosystem is good for Bitcoin. And we've seen a little bit of that. And of course, Bitcoin is at a price now that would have been an all-time high in 2017, while ETH is still significantly, I think, 30% below their previous all-time high. So the Bitcoin didn't pump as high in percentages overnight, but it is definitely higher in its number go up than ETH is. ETH is still trending to zero in Bitcoin terms, even with the positive news. One last word about the Bitcoin ETFs, the spot ETFs. Last week, the ETFs soaked up yet another incredible amount of Bitcoin. In total last week, the Ethereum spot ETF spot 14,389 Bitcoin. During that same period of time, only 3,150 Bitcoin were mined. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to see how this is going. Most of the Bitcoin available for sale is Bitcoin that was freshly mined or had been mined in the past by large commercial miners that, they do have a treasury. They do have some of them do hold a significant amount of Bitcoin that they have mined because they don't want to sell it knowing that the price is going to go up if they don't have to, but they do have to sell some because they need to pay their rent. They need to pay their electric bill. They need to pay their employees. And that's where the majority of this Bitcoin is coming from. And last week alone, the ETFs soaked up almost 5 weeks worth of newly mined Bitcoin. You don't have to know a whole lot about supply and demand to figure out how this is going to end. And this trend doesn't appear to be stopping anytime soon. The numbers aren't quite in yet for today, but it's looking like it's going to be another great week for the Bitcoin ETFs. Just in the first 2 days of this week, Bitcoin ETFs soaked up $237.2 million of the Bitcoin on Monday and $305.7 million of the Bitcoin on Tuesday. There's no reason to expect that that is going to change anytime soon because, as we mentioned, when the ETFs first got approved, there are funds, retirement plans, etc., that can't purchase or even offer Bitcoin to their customers, to their clients, until it has a certain amount of age to it, whether it's regulations or bylaws that say you can't invest or sell or promote an asset that's less than a certain number of months old. There are big potential money pools out there just chomping at the bit to get in on Bitcoin that can't do it yet. It's going to be almost a year from when the ETFs are approved before they're going to be able to buy their first Bitcoin. So it's just insane how much money there is still sitting on the sidelines, which is why I say you're still early. This is nothing. I mean, we haven't even seen the supply shock hit yet. The supply shock for the halving normally takes 6 months to a year before it starts getting priced in, which is why you see the halving bull run 6 months, kick off 6 months to a year after the halving. Likewise, the supply shock of these ETFs buying up 5 times more Bitcoin than is basically produced. It's going to take a while for that supply shock to set in as well. And obviously it's pumped the price of Bitcoin prematurely, setting a new all-time high well even before the halving. But you ain't seen nothing yet. Also, one last note on the ETF, the Ethereum ETFs. If they are approved, don't forget, we saw a month or two worth of solid outflows from GBDC because everybody had been stuck holding their Bitcoin at grayscale. And when the door was finally open to where they could sell it, they did. They fled like rats, fleeing a sinking ship. A very, very similar case exists with Ethereum. I would expect to see lots and lots of Ethereum dumped from grayscale if their ETF gets approved. So this might not necessarily be all roses and perfume for Ethereum right away. Of course, how could we forget on Monday the official ruling in the Copa versus Fake Toshi lawsuit officially dropped? Obviously, we were given a preliminary oral ruling at the conclusion of the trial because Justice Mellor felt so strongly about the facts and evidence that he was, I don't know if you could hear that. Apparently, I just missed a rocket launch. That's really cool. I mean, bummer that I'm missing it. SpaceX has been sneaking so many rockets on bias. They've been launching them like one every day or so, and apparently they're doing so right now because my whole building is shaking. I'm just pausing to see if the mic picks it up. I do have some automatic noise canceling engaged on my soundboard, so maybe all you're hearing is the mic rattling. But literally my desk is rattling, the mic boom stand is rattling, so maybe you can't hear the rocket, but you should at least be able to hear the clinking of my mic shaking like it's an earthquake in Southern California. But I digress. The judge felt so strongly about the facts and the evidence that he issued a very rare but stunningly public rebuke of Fake Toshi in the lawsuit. And then, of course, Monday, the actual written ruling dropped, and it's hundreds of pages long, addressing every piece of evidence, every fraud, every lie that CSW presented or told on the stand in quite detail, dotting all the I's, crossing all the T's. But one of my favorite pieces comes like 130 pages in, where he starts talking about CSW abusing the courts, using the courts to perpetuate fraud and to try to destroy people. And he talks a little bit about Norway, hodl or not, and says that particularly in Florida, even particularly in Norway, that was the case. And even in Florida, where During the Kleinman lawsuit, the issue of identity wasn't on the table to be discussed. It was the Kleinman suing CSW for his share of the Bitcoin he claimed he owned, the family of Ira Kleinman, but they didn't ever contest whether he was Satoshi or not. Of course, they couldn't, because if they're saying if you're Satoshi and you invented Bitcoin with Ira Kleinman, then you owe his half the Bitcoin. So they couldn't, that obviously couldn't argue he's not Bitcoin. He's not Satoshi. That's a lie, because if he's not Satoshi, he doesn't have the Bitcoin, and they're not entitled to any money. But he said even in Florida, where identity wasn't an issue, was all basically stems from the fact that he's been claiming to be Satoshi. The excerpt from the ruling says, in all three jurisdictions, it is clear that Dr. Wright engaged in the deliberate production of false documents to support false claims and used the courts as a vehicle for fraud. It is really, really, really difficult to see criminal charges not coming as a result of this, because this was just excoriating. Of course, if you've been following along, if you're not living under a rock, if you're not new to Bitcoin, none of this is a surprise to you. It's just nice to see it finally in writing. As CSW said when he sued Hodl, welcome to law, or when he was threatening to sue people, welcome to law. Welcome to law, CSW. Additionally, the New York Times ran an article yesterday on the matter, and it is reasonably excoriating also. I've never been a big fan of the New York Times. Of course, I don't live in New York, so I want to get my news a little more locally. And now in the age of the internet, I don't read newspapers at all, because those were printed last night. So by definition, it's old news before it even gets dropped off on your doorstep. But they ran a headline, an article entitled, "This Man Did Not Invent Bitcoin." 4 years, Craig Stephen Wright, an Australian cryptocurrency enthusiast, claimed to be Satoshi Nakamoto, the mysterious creator of Bitcoin. Then the courts got involved. It's a really, really long article. It's fairly well written. It does some things, makes some assumptions I don't necessarily agree with, but in general, it's a really good article. But I mean, I'm even just taking exception to the sub-headline, then the courts got involved. The courts didn't get involved. Craig drugged these people to court. He was using the court. As Justice Mellor said in his ruling, he was using the courts to promote his fraud. The courts didn't get involved. It wasn't justice stepping up to the plate and saying, oh, we see what you're doing and we're going to put a stop to it. To some extent, COPA did. That was the Crypto Open Patent Alliance. You know, the fintech companies got together and formed to go after CSW, to defend the people he was attacking, to defend the developers that he was threatening to sue into oblivion for infringing on his patents, etc. So that's about all I have to say about CSW. It's just really entertaining to see it in writing. If you got the time to read 130 some odd pages of legal opinion, it's very well written. It's very damning. All right, on to what makes today and every Wednesday so special, and that is that today is DCA Wednesday. If you don't know what DCA is, if this is the first time listening to this podcast, and obviously it is for some of you based on the numbers that I've seen, so welcome aboard, by the way, if this is your first time listening. DCA is short for dollar cost averaging, and dollar cost averaging is an investment strategy where you invest your money in equal portions at regular intervals, regardless of price. For example, this is going to be our 148th stack. We started stacking on our regular interval being weekly on Wednesdays, all the way back on Wednesday, July 28th, 2021. So far, we've stacked 147 times. Our regular interval, we wanted to keep it simple. We wanted to keep it real, easily reasonable enough that the average person listening should be able to stack at least that much. So we chose $20 as our equal portion. Obviously, weekly on Wednesdays is a regular interval. And we've stacked over those 147 Wednesdays a total of $2,940 worth of US dollars, worth US fiat cuckbucks, as Marty Bent likes to call them, including about $66.15 in fees. And that has gained us a stack of 9,340,158 Satoshis. And we purchased them at an average cost basis of $31,476.98. So a substantial discount from where Bitcoin is currently priced, just because we bought the highs, we bought the lows. We purchased Bitcoin more expensive than even it is today. I think we purchased Bitcoin for as expensive as $72,899, and we purchased it as low as $16,469. The point being, we rode the all-time high all the way up in 2021. We rode all the way down to the bottom of the bear market, and now we're riding our way back up. And that's the beauty of dollar cost averaging. It lets you get in at an average price as opposed to trying to guess, trying to gamble, trying to time the market. The old adage goes, time in the markets beats timing the market every time it's tried. And we are going to add to that stack today, once again, using the handy dandy Cash App. Cash App is not a sponsor of the show. I just think it's the easiest way to make small purchases. I also like the fact that even though they charge a higher fee than plenty of other exchanges, they will let me transfer that Bitcoin to my hardware wallet without a mining fee, which basically makes it break even. So I already have 20 bucks on my Cash App. I've already got my Cash App open. So it's just a matter of tapping on Bitcoin, tapping buy, entering $20 because sometimes that's a choice. Today it wants me to spend 5, 15, 25, or 50. So manual entering 20, hitting confirm, and boom, just like that, we stacked another 28,177 sats. And the price of Bitcoin got a little bit cheaper than when we first started the podcast because we purchased at $69,382. And that raises our total stack to 9,368,335 sats. It does raise our average cost basis by another $118 to $31,595.80, which is not too shabby. Basically, we've taken now 2,960 US dollars and converted into Satoshis that are currently worth $6,499.95. When Bitcoin continues to moon and eventually breaches the $100,000 mark, whether it does that next week or next November or by the end of the year, either way, when that milestone is achieved, that stack will be worth $9,368.33, which is more than triple the amount of fiat that we've converted into it. And if Bitcoin hits 1 million one day, if that's your moon, again, this is about stacking another single Satoshi, and we're going to stack again next Wednesday and every Wednesday. But even if we never stack another sat, if all the sats dry up, no one's willing to sell us any sats, that stack will still be worth $93,683.35 when Bitcoin hits that dollar sat parity at the 1 million US dollar mark. Obviously, if you believe that we're going to see Bitcoin become the global reserve currency, if the entire world is going to start using Bitcoin, at least in some capacity, it's going to go a heck of a lot higher than 1 million. As we were fond of mentioning, there's only a couple 100,000 sats available for the average person to buy if we try and spread it out amongst everybody in the world. And we already have 9.3 million of them. And that's not too shabby for just $2,960 at just $20 a week. Real quick, before I wrap things up, just in time to have missed the SpaceX launch, I want to ask you to help support this podcast, not necessarily financially. Of course, we do appreciate every sat you stream us and every sat you boost us on the value for value model, but I'm talking about pumping those numbers, feeding the algorithm monster. And some of you have been doing it because it's working. And that means so much to me. It's the single biggest way you can help this podcast. You can do so in one of two easy ways. Obviously, regardless of where you're listening to this podcast, you have an ability to write a review of the podcast, to rate the podcast, to comment on the podcast, whatever that platform lets you do. That feeds that algorithm monster, which means that when people are looking for podcasts, they're more likely to see us suggested. And if they see us suggested, some of those people are going to click on the podcast and listen, and we're going to hopefully orange pill some people. So it's not just about helping grow the audience. It's about helping orange pill people that might not have been exposed to Bitcoin, or the people that think they don't have $69,000 to buy a Bitcoin and they don't realize that you could just follow along and buy just $20 a week or even $1 worth of Bitcoin, whatever is in your budget. It's obviously a you do you kind of thing. But by helping promote this podcast, by rating it and reviewing it, if you give it a 5-star rating, that'd be fantastic. That helps more people find out about the show and more people find out about Bitcoin. Similarly, if you're not following us on Twitter, the Twitter handle for the podcast is at BTC Bulletin. And I'm sorry, it's at BTC Bulletin Pod. Got distracted. There's still a little bit of rumble going on off in the distance. Sometimes when the atmospherics are just right, you can hear that rocket just echo, or something else is rumbling out there if it's not the rocket. Either way, as I'm getting distracted and back on track, follow our Twitter account, please. We're at BTC Bulletin Pod. I don't tweet out a whole lot. I do tweet out some interesting things that I talk about on the show or that I'm going to talk about on the show, and I tweet out leaks when we post a new podcast, but we're not spamming your feed by any stretch of the imagination. So if you're not already following us on Twitter, please follow at BTC Bulletin Pod. Again, that feeds that algorithm monster. We're not a blue check, and we're not paying Elon Musk, to be a subscriber, to be a premium member. So, we get not shadow banned, but we're not promoted. We're downgraded in our view, unless you're following us. And the more people that follow us, again, the more people that are going to see our tweets and are going to find out about the podcast and hopefully become orange pilled. Obviously, if you feel so inclined, there is tipping enabled on Twitter. There's a support link through Spotify where you can support the podcast directly through Spotify. My preferable method is to receive sats on the value for value model, though. If you do feel so inclined to support the podcast, we'd much rather add your sats to the stack than to add filthy fiat and have to convert that at a later time. You can also support the podcast by using any of the referral links in the show notes. None of these companies are sponsors, but we have referral codes for Cash App, obviously. If it's available and you choose to use it, you'll get paid to use it that first time if you sign up via referral code, and the show will get paid as well. Likewise, we have a referral code for Strike, which is another great service. I use Strike when I buy my coffee from El Salvador, for example, because it allows me to send sats, and I can do it without actually draining my stack. I can convert fiat. I'll send dollars, they get sats, and therefore I don't have any tax event as a result, and it just works out nicely all the way around. And I also have a referral code for the Fold card, and I believe their current offering is that you'll get 20,000 sats free for signing up and following their terms and conditions, and the show will get 10,000 sats. So that's a great way to help support the podcast, add some sats to our stack without giving us any of your sats. All right. Thank you once again for listening. Thank you to all of those new listeners that you've helped bring to the podcast to bump those countries back in that broke into the top 10 into the top 10. That is really cool. Those numbers are still going up. I was looking at the stats right before I started recording so I could have the most recent numbers possible. So I was as correct as possible, but those numbers are coming in as I speak. So maybe there'll even be a change by the end of the show or by next Wednesday to talk about. So that's really exciting. As I mentioned, Australia, you're really, really close to breaking into the top 10. So thank you so much. That just means so much to me. Thank you very much once again from the bottom of my heart. Either way, though, don't forget to join us next Wednesday and every Wednesday while we keep adding sats that stack just $20 at a time. But either way, keep on stacking those sats, you sexy sat stackers.